On the broadcast now, we are joined by Dr. Malcolm Davis. He's joining us live from Canberra. He's a senior analyst in defence strategy and capability at Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Also joining us live on the broadcast is VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. Jessica, thank you so much. Let me go across to you first. We know that you are joining from Arlington and Virginia. Just to give us a brief overview, who is currently leading the latest polls?
It is really neck and neck across the country, especially in these battleground states, 48% to 48%, according to the last New York Times Siena College poll, which is usually a vaunted predictor of where we stand in the race. But it is really difficult to know who's going to win this U.S. election. Here in Virginia, though, Harris leads by as much as 6 points. So that is less of a mystery. We are going to see these polls open in just about 3 hours' time behind me at the Arlington County Central Library.
Jessica, how did the candidates spend the last day of campaigning? Just for the sake of our viewers, if you could just summarize that.
Sure. Well, they have been spending the day crisscrossing the major battleground states. In particular, you heard Kamala Harris in Philadelphia talking about the importance of democracy beginning in Pennsylvania. And that, of course, is where she ended her closing arguments in the city of, quote, brotherly love. So she really spent the day crisscrossing the state, literally ping-ponging from the east to the west, Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, Wilkes-Barre to Reading, Pennsylvania, to other parts of the state. She is really focusing on getting out the vote there in Pennsylvania. It is a critical battleground state, and I was just there over the weekend where I saw a lot of reporting indicating that if Trump can drive up the vote in the redder parts of the state, essentially the middle of Pennsylvania, that he has a chance of winning Pennsylvania. This has the 19 votes in the Electoral College. This is the biggest prize on election night. So we have a lot of attention focused on Pennsylvania. Across the other states, we saw Trump in North Carolina and in Michigan, but also spending time in Pennsylvania for those reasons. He wants to make sure that he is going to get out the vote and secure North Carolina. He lost it, or it has been very tight in the past. He lost it in the last cycle. And in Michigan, it is more likely that Harris will win Michigan, but he does want to get out the vote, especially in that western part of Michigan, which tends to be more conservative, away from Detroit. That is why he ended the race there.
Right, Jessica, just hold on there. We will come back to you in just a bit. Malcolm, now let me just go across to you. We were earlier talking to our correspondent Anas Malik, who had joined us live from Saida in Lebanon. He told us how people in Lebanon were awaiting the election results for them to be able to predict the fate that awaits the country, which is seeing a rising death toll amid Israeli strikes. Now, the U.S. elections are pertinent to the war. Given your area of expertise, how do you see the U.S. defense and foreign policy shaping up? Should either candidate win?
Well, it's hard to say, because if Kamala Harris wins, there's probably an assumption that maybe there's more continuity than change from the previous Biden administration. But that assumption could be challenged. She may take a more assertive stance on the international stage. She's probably going to change her key advisors in terms of Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. So she'll have different people giving different advice. And she faces a very dangerous security environment in terms of a range of major power threats: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, all acting against US and allied interests. If Trump wins, it's really even more difficult to predict how US foreign policy will evolve. But as with the previous Trump administration, he's likely to adopt a much more transactionalist approach to foreign and defense policy. He's much more likely to basically demand that key allies and partners step up and burden share to a higher degree. And whilst I think burden sharing to a higher degree is a good thing, because that's what we all need given the dramatically increasing risk in the security environment, the risk is that allies and partners will lose confidence in US support. And you could see, for example, if the concern over extended nuclear deterrent security guarantees increases, you could see states, for example, like South Korea or Japan, looking to get nuclear weapons. So there are risks both ways.
Right. Malcolm, since you last spoke of Donald Trump, now he has been talking about ending the war. Should he adopt a different policy unlike the last time, as you just spoke of? Will that result, in your opinion, be achieved, which he's talking about, that is of ending the war?
I think he's talking about ending the war in Ukraine, and I think he's deluding himself. If we're talking about Ukraine, Putin does not seek to end the war. He seeks to continue to fight it. He probably sees Trump as facilitating his victory in Ukraine. And so I think that the notion that somehow Trump can magically end the war in Ukraine is fanciful. As for the Middle East, I think he doesn't have much chance there either. He's more likely to support Israel than Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has already indicated that she wants to bring the war in Gaza to an end, but she's going to have a very hard time doing that, because even if she wants to bring the war to an end, there's no guarantee that Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran will necessarily want to bring the war to an end. So, you know, for the war to end, all sides need to seek peace.
Right. Malcolm, stay on with us. Jessica, I'm just going to come back to you now. More than 75 million Americans have early voted. How does that compare to the last presidential elections?
Well, it's about half of the turnout for early voting that we saw in 2020. And largely that's in part because we were in the middle of a pandemic. There were so many restrictions, and there was a lot of encouragement to early vote for certain parts of the population for their own safety. But one key difference we're seeing this year is that Republicans have outpaced Democrats in early voting. And one reason for that is that Donald Trump 4 years ago said, don't early vote. You can only really trust the system if you do it same day. This time, the Republican Party has really taken a different position, and there's been an early get out the vote message from the Trump campaign, sending more Republicans out. That has had a great effect in some of the swing states where we've seen much higher Republican turnout than Democratic turnout. That does not mean that he will win the election. It just means going in to election day, the count will be higher on the Republican side of the ledger in some of those states.
Right. Malcolm, given the voter turnout, which states, in your opinion, will be critical in determining the election outcome, given their varied support of Israel in the conflict?
Yeah, look, Pennsylvania is obviously at the top of that list. I think that's the crucial state that either Trump or Harris needs to win. There are other states, you know, North Carolina is really important for Trump. Michigan and Wisconsin are also critical. But there's those critical battleground states, and there's a list that I think everyone understands that both candidates will be vying to win to get to that magic 270 electoral college votes or get higher. And I think that the real risk is that this election could be so tight that either we simply won't know on election day who wins, and so it could drag on in terms of legal challenges and a reversion to the 2000 election where we were counting hanging chads, or there could be violence, and that would be the real shame if there's violence on the streets because one side or the other is not accepting the vote.
Jessica, could you give us an overview of the swing states? A lot has been spoken of about how critical these states are in the election outcomes. Just give us an overview thus far.
Well, Pennsylvania is the big prize with those 19 electoral votes, as Malcolm alluded to, and it's something that both candidates have really focused on. We've obviously seen Harris crisscross in the last day of her campaigning the state, spending time on both sides of the state, east to west, in the central part of the state, really trying to get out the vote for Democrats. One of the things we're seeing in early voting that is shaping that is that we've seen more rural voters come out than urban voters, and that has the Democrats very concerned about turning out the vote in major urban centers, because that is usually their stronghold, and particularly in Pennsylvania, they want to get out that vote. As Malcolm mentioned, North Carolina, a big important state for Donald Trump. He won it by just a percentage point or less than a percentage point, and it is very contested. And, you know, we did see, obviously, the hurricane impact how voting has been run. And so we are actually seeing the fruit of that, because they did change some of the rules in the western part of the state that was impacted by Hurricane Helene. We've seen greater turnout in those areas, in part potentially because of some of those changes. And so really there is a great focus on not disenfranchising voters, making sure that everyone can get a right to vote, that has a right to vote, but also making sure that there are clean and safe and trustworthy elections, because so much of the discussion going into this election, especially on the right, has been this election has to be trusted. And there are a lot of doubts raised about the trust, right? Especially, again, on the right and amongst the Republican Party. So this is, as Malcolm said, really important to get out the vote all the way and make sure that these votes are counted up until the end. What that's going to look like is we will most likely, almost certainly, not get an election result on at the end of today. We are looking at getting those votes counted into Wednesday, Thursday, perhaps even through the weekend, particularly because, as he also mentioned, even if there's no violence, there's likely to be some court action to either encourage voting, stop voting, impact the voting. And will we see hanging chads where we don't have a result until the end of the year? That is certainly not the hope. There's been a lot of electoral changes since then, and even since 2020 to avoid that. But because this race is so close, they have to make sure that every vote is counted, and that could take quite a few days to get there. Remember, 2020, Biden did not declare victory for 4 days. We could be looking at least at that, if not longer.
Malcolm, I'm going to pick your brains on your area of expertise again. Now, Israel has been wanting to get the United States into the war. We've seen how the Biden administration's stance has been towards it. Do you see a difference in the policy should the Democrats continue on?
Well, as I said, Kamala Harris has just recently stated that she wants to end the war in Gaza. She's got her work cut out for her in doing that because, firstly, Israel has to accept some sort of ceasefire. And secondly, Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah have to accept a ceasefire. And there's currently no indications that any parties are really looking at a ceasefire. You've even got Iran threatening to strike Israel yet again after that devastating Israeli strike on Iran. So there's no indication of either side taking an off-ramp and moving towards some sort of peace settlement. And from an Israeli perspective, look, I think that it's difficult for the Israelis to step back when you have enemies like Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, threatening Israel's destruction. But at the same time, the civilian body count is mounting up in places like Gaza and southern Lebanon. So there's international pressure on Israel in that regard. How Kamala Harris will handle this is really difficult to see because she's not going to actually be president until January 20th, 2025. So she can't really do anything until then. And, the conflict may have moved on at that point. And she's then got to work out who is going to be her Secretary of State, who's going to be Secretary of Defense, what their policies are. This could go on for quite some time. And as I said earlier, we simply don't know what Trump would do if he becomes president.
Thank you so much, Malcolm Davis and Jessica Stone, for those invaluable inputs and joining us on the broadcast and giving us your time. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.